It started with the crew. Not the audience. Not Jimmy. The crew. The people who had seen everything, who had worked 1,000 tapings and learned, through the sheer repetition of professional exposure, to feel nothing they were not paid to feel. The camera operators. The boom operators. The stagehands in the wings, the woman who managed the teleprompter and had been managing it for 11 years without once looking up from her screen. They stopped first. One by one, and then all at once they stopped what they were doing and stood still, looking at the monitor feeds, or looking at the stage, or simply standing with whatever they had been holding, a cable, a clipboard, a headset, hanging at their sides, forgotten. Jimmy Fallon noticed them before he noticed anything else. He was at his desk. Sylvester Stallone was in the guest chair, and the interview had been everything you hoped an interview with Sylvester Stallone would be. Big and funny and unexpectedly tender in places. The way Stallone always was when you got past the mythology and reached the man underneath. He was 77 years old. He had been famous for nearly 50 years. He was telling a story, something about a film set in the early 80s, a story that had the audience laughing and leaning forward simultaneously, and Jimmy was in it with him, fully present. The way Jimmy was always fully present with a guest he genuinely loved. And then Jimmy looked to his left, toward the camera platform, and the operator there had lowered his camera. Not repositioned it, lowered it. The man was looking at something off stage that Jimmy could not see from his desk, and the grip beside him was looking at the same thing. And the floor director, who had not stopped moving since the taping began, was standing completely still with her hand pressed to the side of her headset, listening. Her face doing something it did not usually do. Jimmy looked at Stallone. Stallone had noticed it too. He had stopped mid-sentence, not because he had lost the thread, but because something in the room had shifted, the way air shifts before weather arrives, and even a man who has spent 50 years in front of cameras feels it when a room changes beneath him. Then the sound reached the stage, not loud, not dramatic. Not loud at all, in fact, barely anything, the kind of sound that requires the room to already be quiet enough to hear it, which the room was, suddenly, because the crew had gone quiet first, and the quiet had spread the way quiet spreads when it is the right response to something. A piano. Simple, single notes, unhurried, played by someone who was not performing, not running a scale, not warming up. Not demonstrating technique, but playing the way a person plays when they are alone with an instrument and they have something they need to say, and music is the only language that fits. It was coming from the green room. Stallone's hands had gone still on the armrests of his chair. His head had turned slightly, the way a person's head turns when they are trying to locate a sound without being certain they are hearing it correctly. His jaw was set. Something moved through his face, not across the surface of it, but through it. The way weather moves through a landscape, rearranging everything underneath, without disturbing the surface until the last possible moment. Jimmy Fallon watched him. He did not say a word. He did not look at his notes. He did not look at the camera. He watched Sylvester Stallone sit in a guest chair on a Tuesday night in October 2023 and listen to a piano being played in a room he could not see, and he watched Stallone's face do something that 50 years of being Sylvester Stallone had not prepared it to conceal. 300 people in that studio made no sound. The entire studio froze. A stagehand near the left wing had been carrying a coil of cable, and he set it down. Slowly, without looking at it, without taking his eyes from the stage. The director in the control room had stopped issuing instructions. The band, the full Tonight Show band, 14 musicians who had been preparing for the next musical cue, sat with their instruments untouched. Listening, Questlove had his hands flat on his knees. Nobody had told them to stop. Nobody had told anyone to stop. They had stopped because the thing happening in that room was the kind of thing that stops people. The involuntary kind. The kind that arrives without announcement and renders professional habit temporarily irrelevant. Had something gone wrong? The audience could not tell. What they could tell was that Sylvester Stallone, a man who had made a career out of being immovable, a man whose face had become one of the most recognizable faces in the history of cinema, precisely because it conveyed a kind of bedrock certainty, was sitting in a chair on a television set, looking as though the bedrock had just shifted beneath him. The piano kept playing, and then Stallone said one word, so quietly that the studio microphone almost lost it, caught only because the room was by that point completely, entirely, holding its breath silent. He said, "Sal, to understand what happened on that stage in October 2023, you need to understand what happened in the winter of 1974. Sylvester Stallone wasn't always Sylvester Stallone, icon and legend. In 1974, he was 28 years old, and he had been in New York for 5 years, surviving on the margins of an acting career that had produced, in those 5 years, a handful of small roles, one film appearance that led to nothing, and the particular exhaustion of a man who has bet everything on one outcome and has not yet received any confirmation that the bet was not a mistake. He was living in a one-room apartment on West 43rd Street with his wife Sasha. They had very little money. He was writing constantly, scripts, treatments, fragments of stories he could not yet see the full shape of, because writing was the one thing he could do that cost nothing but time and conviction. And time and conviction were the only resources he had in any quantity. He had a dog named Butkus. He loved the dog the way people love animals when people have not yet been able to give them everything they intend to give them. Some weeks, feeding Butkus was a more serious calculation than it should have been. That winter, he took a part-time job at the front desk of a Yemka on West 63rd Street, because the part-time work paid $40 a week, and $40 a week was the difference between keeping the apartment and not. He worked the early morning shift, 5 to 9, 4 days a week, because the morning shift was the one that nobody else wanted, which meant it was the one available to him. The Yimka had a piano in a room off the main corridor, a practice room, barely larger than a closet, with a donated upright piano that had not been tuned in several years, and a small window at shoulder height that looked out onto 63rd Street. It was available to members on a first-come basis. In the early mornings, before the building filled, it was almost always empty. The man who used it was named Salvatore Conti. Everyone called him Sal. Sal was 67 years old in 1974. He was a retired machinist who had worked at a plant in the Bronx for 31 years before the plant closed, and retirement arrived sooner than he had planned for. He had grown up in East Harlem in a family that had come from Naples in 1921. And music had been the structure underneath everything in that household. Not performed music, not concert music, but the domestic kind. The kind that lives in a family the way a particular smell lives in a house. So embedded you stop noticing it is there until you are somewhere it is absent, and the absence is suddenly very loud. His mother had played piano. He had learned from her at 6 years old and played steadily, without ambition, for the next 60 years. He played the way his mother had played, which was without flourish, without performance, with the plain and patient attention of someone for whom music was not expression, but conversation. A way of speaking to something that did not require words. He arrived at the Yimka at 5:30 every morning, 6 days a week. He signed in at the front desk, walked to the practice room, and played for 45 minutes before going home to make breakfast for himself and his wife, Rosa, who had bad knees and did not go out early in the mornings. He had been doing this for 2 years by the time Stallone arrived at the front desk. They began talking, because Stallone was there when Sal arrived, and there when Sal left, and the front desk was the only point of passage. They talked first the way strangers talk at a front desk, briefly, about nothing, about the weather coming through the glass doors, about whether the elevator was working. Then, over weeks, the way morning conversations at a front desk sometimes deepen when both parties are consistent, and the hour is early, and the building is quiet, and the usual protections that people bring to interaction with strangers are not fully activated yet at 5:30 in the morning. Sal asked Stallone, one morning in February, what he was doing at a Yimka front desk at 5 in the morning. Stallone told him. Sal listened without interruption, without the encouraging nods that people deploy when they are not fully listening, with the still and level attention of someone who is actually receiving what is being said. He asked what Stallone was writing. Stallone told him about the script, the one that had been forming for months, the one about the boxer, the one he could see fully but had not yet found the exact shape of on the page. Sal listened. He asked, what does the boxer want? Not what does he need. What does he want? Stallone said, he wants to go the distance. He wants to still be standing at the end. Sal was quiet for a moment. Then he said, that's it. That's the whole story. Don't look for anything else. They talked every morning after that, not always about the script, about Sal's years in the Bronx, about Rosa's family in Naples, about Stallone's childhood in Hell's Kitchen and his years in Philadelphia, about what it felt like to want something so completely that the wanting became indistinguishable from the rest of your life. Sal never offered encouragement in the performed sense. He offered attention, which was different and better. He asked questions that required real answers. He remembered what Stallone had said the previous day and the day before that, and he built on it, the way a person builds who is genuinely interested in the architecture. One morning in March, Stallone arrived before his shift began and sat outside the practice room and listened to Sal play. He sat on the floor in the corridor, his back against the wall, and he listened for the full 45 minutes without moving. When Sal came out and found him there, he said nothing about it. He simply signed out at the front desk and said, same time tomorrow, and went home to make Ross's breakfast. Stallone wrote the final draft of Rocky in 3.5 days in the spring of 1975. He has said this many times, in many interviews, across many decades. He has said it was the fastest he had ever written anything and the most certain he had ever been, while writing, that what he was writing was right. What he has not said, in any interview, in any public context, in any of the many times he has told the story of that script and that period of his life, is that on the morning of the second day, when the script was moving and the story was alive, but he had reached a section he could not cross, he walked to the Yimka on West 63rd Street at 5 in the morning, not for his shift, which had ended weeks before when a better-paying job had come through, but to sit in the corridor outside the practice room and listen to Sal Conti play. He sat there for 45 minutes. He went home. He wrote through the section that had stopped him. He did not stop again. Sal moved back to the Bronx with Rosa in the fall of 1975 to be closer to Rosa's sister after Rosa's knees made climbing stairs impossible. Stallone lost the thread of him in the way threads are lost when a life accelerates beyond the geography that held a friendship in place. Rocky came out in November 1976. Everything changed in the particular and total way that everything changes when a film like Rocky arrives in the world. He had tried, twice, in the years immediately following, to find Sal, to go back to the IMCA, to ask if anyone remembered a retired machinist from the Bronx who came in at 5:30 6 days a week. Nobody remembered. The city was large, and the years moved fast, and Salvatore Conti was not a person the world had any mechanism for finding. He had thought about Sal for 49 years. He had thought about him every time he sat down to write something that mattered. He had thought about him on the morning Rocky was nominated for 10 Academy Awards. He had thought about him with a particular and unanswerable quality of gratitude that has no destination, every single time someone asked him where Rocky had come from, and he had given the answer that was true, but was not the whole truth. The whole truth included a man at a Yemka piano at 5:30 in the morning in the winter of 1974, who had asked, "What does he want?" Subscribe and leave a comment, because the most powerful part of this story is still ahead. Behind the scenes, the connection had been completed 11 weeks before the October taping, through a path that had begun with Rosa Conti's granddaughter, a 29-year-old woman named Maria Indelicato, who lived in the Pelham Bay neighborhood of the Bronx and who had grown up hearing her grandmother tell a story about a young man at a Yemka front desk who was going to be something, who sat outside a practice room in a corridor one morning and listened to her grandfather play for 45 minutes. Rosa had died in 2009. Sal had died in 2014 at 87 years old, still playing piano 6 days a week until the last year of his life. Maria had inherited, among other things, the upright practice journal Sal had kept for 40 years, a composition notebook in which he logged, in small and deliberate handwriting, the date, the pieces he played, and occasionally a sentence or two about the morning. In the entry for March 14, 1975, in the middle of what was otherwise a record of music and nothing more, the young man from the desk came back today. Sat in the corridor for the full session. Did not say anything when I came out. I think he needed to hear something without being asked to do anything about it. That is what music is for. Sometimes, Maria had been watching a documentary about Stallone's early years in New York. She had heard him describe, briefly, a period of working a front desk job and talking to people who asked the right questions. She had called her father. Her father had called his brother. The family had looked at the composition notebook. They had agreed, collectively and quickly, that Maria should write a letter. The letter had reached Stallone's production office within 2 weeks. Stallone had been given the relevant entry from the composition notebook, a photocopy, the original too fragile to send, the following day. He had called Maria from his car, alone, on the way to a meeting he subsequently did not attend. The arrangement had been made by Stallone himself, directly, in one phone call to The Tonight Show's executive producer. He had said, "I want to play something on the show." He had said, "I learned something from a man who played piano for 45 minutes every morning, and I want to play it on the show." The producer had said yes before understanding entirely what was being proposed. Stallone did not explain further. He had not played piano in public in his life. He had been playing, privately, for 3 years. He had not told anyone. He had started because Sal had played, and because Sal was gone, and because the only thing left to do with a 49-year-old gratitude that had nowhere else to go was to learn the language it had spoken. The green room had been equipped with an upright piano 6 days before the taping. The crew had been told it was for a musical guest. Nobody had been told it was for Stallone. Now the piano in the green room was still playing. Single notes, unhurried, plain, the music that Sal Conti had played in a practice room in the IMCA on West 63rd Street in the winter of 1974. Not performed, not demonstrating technique, just present, just speaking in the only language that fit. Stallone had stood up from the guest chair. He had not asked permission. He had not looked at Jimmy. He had stood up the way a person stands up when something pulls them upright from the inside, and he had walked off the stage, past the cameras, past the crew who had already stopped, who were already standing still with their cables and their clipboards and their headsets, and down the corridor toward the green room. Jimmy Fallon watched him go. Then, Jimmy stood up from his desk. He walked to the front of his stage, and he looked out at 300 people, and he said, quietly, "I don't know exactly what is happening right now, but I know it's real, and I think we should all just be here for it. But this is the moment no one in the studio and no one watching at home ever saw coming." The piano in the green room stopped. There was a silence of perhaps 20 seconds. Then, Stallone walked back out onto the stage. He was not crying. His face was entirely composed, in the way that faces are composed when the composure is chosen rather than automatic, when it is an act of will rather than of professional habit. He was carrying something, a composition notebook, dark green, its cover soft with age, its spine repaired with tape that had itself gone old and brown. He held it with both hands, carefully, the way you hold something that is not yours but has been entrusted to you. He sat back down in the guest chair. He set the notebook on the desk between himself and Jimmy, and he held it flat with one hand, not opening it. Jimmy looked at the notebook. He looked at Stallone. Stallone said, "His granddaughter sent this to me. It's his practice journal. 40 years of mornings. He kept it his whole life." He opened it to a page that had been marked with a small slip of paper. He turned it so Jimmy could read the entry dated March 14th, 1975. Jimmy read it. He read it again. When he looked up, his eyes were very bright. Stallone said, "I sat in that corridor because I had been writing for 2 days, and I was stuck, and I didn't know how to get unstuck, and the only thing I could think to do was go and listen to him play. I didn't knock on the door. I didn't ask. I just sat down on the floor in the corridor and listened for 45 minutes, and then I went home, and I was not stuck anymore." He paused. His voice was level and deliberate, the voice of a man choosing every word. He asked me one question one morning about the story I was writing. He said, "What does he want? Not what does he need? What does he want?" And I went home and wrote the answer, and the answer was the movie. He looked at the notebook. I won an Oscar for that movie. I have been asked 10,000 times where it came from. The answer is a man at a Yimka front desk at 5:30 in the morning who played piano for 45 minutes without anyone asking him to. Jimmy could not speak. His mouth was open, and then it was closed. And then it was open again, and there was nothing in it. He pressed his hand flat against the desk. He left it there. The audience had been still for a long time. Now, from the back row, a sound began. Not applause, not yet. Something quieter and more total. The sound of a room full of people exhaling together. The release of something that has been held. Then the applause came, and it came all at once. All 300 people. And the crew. The crew who had stopped first. Who had felt it first, who had been standing with their cables and their clipboards at their sides for the last 12 minutes, started too, from the wings and the camera platforms and the control room. Because there was no professional reason not to. Because professionalism had decided, for this particular Tuesday night in October, to stand down. Jimmy Fallon put his face in his hands. He stayed that way for a long moment. Then he looked up and said, "I have had a lot of nights on this stage. And I have never been so glad that the crew stopped. Share and subscribe. Make sure this story is never forgotten. Maria Indelicato flew from New York to Los Angeles the following month, at Stallone's invitation, for a private dinner at his home. She brought the composition notebook, the original, not a photocopy, and she left it there. She said her grandfather would have wanted it to be somewhere it was useful. Stallone keeps it in his writing room, beside the desk where he writes. Not framed, not displayed. Set flat on the corner of the desk, closed, where he can reach it. He has been playing piano for 3 years now. He plays in the mornings when he can, before the day begins. He does not play for audiences. He plays the way Sal played, without flourish, without performance, with the plain and patient attention of someone for whom it is not expression, but conversation. A way of speaking to something that does not require words. In an interview 6 months after the taping, he was asked what he plays. He said, "Mostly the same things, the things I listened to in that corridor." He was asked if he was good. He said, "I am not the point. The playing is the point." Sal taught me that without meaning to. He was asked if he thought Sal knew what he had done. Stallone was quiet for a moment. Then he said, Sal asked what the boxer wanted, not what he needed. He knew that wanting was the thing. That wanting is always the whole story, if you find the right want. He knew that because he wanted to play piano every morning at 5:30 for 40 years, and he did it. He never needed anyone to know. He just needed to play. Some people give you what you need without knowing what they have. They are not aware they are giving anything at all. They are simply doing what they do, steadily, quietly, every morning, for 40 years. And the steadiness itself is the gift. And the gift arrives without a label, and you spend the rest of your life trying to find the words for it. The morning the notebook arrived, Stallone sat down and played for the first time in 3 weeks. He played for 45 minutes. He did not stop in the middle. He did not rush the ending. He played the whole thing through, and when he was finished, he sat with his hands in his lap for a while, looking at the keyboard. Then he went to his desk, and he wrote.